Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the 5th episode of the story in which Naruto accomplished the impossible. You cannot stop the flow of time. Its will only rotates in one direction. A mere human cannot change that path. This story is from Dorsey. Please support him, her. She is also a digital artist, so please visit her profile. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. Toraku had been wandering for hours in the empty passages of the corridor, and his feet started to ache. Strange. That's never happened before. I know the way. I'm sure. I always go this way. He passed by a burnt-out gaslight, but before he left it, he stopped. His hands moved without second thought. He carefully tapped the burner once. Nothing happened. He narrowed his eyes and repeated the movement, and on his third try he was blinded by the yellow light from the lamp. It forced him to step backward, rubbing his eyes as the sudden light painfully stabbed into his irises. When he gained back his vision and the pain finally faded away, he looked back at the gaslight with a satisfied smile, before he turned to continue his wade through the water. He finally arrived at his destination and worriedly glanced toward the rusty metal door with the cracks and bulges. Toraku ran his eyes over the unidentifiable forged pattern, then he looked down to the water, waiting for the thing on the other side of the door to begin its attempt to force itself out and the concrete floor to disappear out from under his feet. But nothing happened for several long minutes. Everything was silent, no snarling, no ruffling, and no sound of impact as that thing charged against the door. The blond boy narrowed his eyes, watching the black water around his ankles. A thought reared its head inside his mind. Something was different. Toraku narrowed his eyes even more and finally moved his orbs toward the rusty door again. He examined it carefully, centimeter by centimeter, but he couldn't find what was bothering him. Everything just looked the same as last time and as always. He let out a defeated sigh and moved his eyes back to the concrete floor under the water. He couldn't see it, but he could feel the rough edges under his naked feet. He blinked when realization hit him hard and flung his head toward the door, together with his body, almost falling down into the water by the sudden movement when he grabbed the handle. A handle. There is a door handle. He stayed in the awkward position, frozen, not daring to move his body and absolutely not move the handle. He finally shook his head to ease away his worry and slowly leaned toward the door and placed his ear onto the pleasantly hot surface and closed his eyes, concentrating with his every nerve to the sounds behind the door. Everything was silent except the noise of water dripping. Thoughts ran across his mind with insane speed. There is a handle. I can open it. I can finally see that thing. As he slowly opened his eyes, the warm sensation from the door increased, teasing him, tempting every part of his body, stroking every nerve inside his flesh to finally move his hands and push down that damn handle. Toraku narrowed his eyes, doubts and worry started to fill his mind. Suddenly he heard something from his back. Not from behind the door, from his back, only centimeters from his spine. A soft textile. Ruffled, maybe silk, and the sewer filled with the scent of vanilla. He wanted to move his body, to turn around, and his mind pushed away every other thought, only the screaming voice stayed. Run! Move, you idiot! His muscles tensed, ready to jump when another thought popped up. No, his thoughts calmed down to an almost unnatural level. He could now imagine himself falling asleep in his dreams, while he closed his eyes. Just run, you damn moron. He felt the burdens disappear from his shoulders, his soul settled down, like a lake on a summer day without any breeze to ruffle its surface. No, the screaming voice died down to a whimper of fear. Why not? You are going to kill me. A soft smile spread across his face. Have faith in me. Everything will be all right. With this last thought, the sensation behind him died down and disappeared, so did the voice in his mind. He slowly moved his head and glanced over his shoulder, but only the empty tunnel winked back to him. He closed his eyes once more and let out a breath and pushed down on the door handle. It moved smoothly, without a hitch, until it finally reached its final destination and the bolt left the socket. The door is now open. He just has to pull it. He slowly opened his eyes and pulled it gently toward himself. The tired hinges squeaked plaintively and several small waves appeared on the water's flat surface by the small movement as the door opened a small slit, then stuck on the rough surface of the concrete floor. Toraku narrowed his eyes and gave more strength to the next pull, and the door bumped over a knob on the floor, which tripped its unsteady frame, creating bigger and bigger waves around his ankles. He glanced toward the slit. It still wasn't enough. He gathered his strength and this time tugged on the door with more power. The rusty hinges gave up, and released the wall. Toraku felt as the enormous weight of the rusty door started to fall on him, and in the last second he managed to roll out from under the falling door, which hit the water with a loud splash. The sound of the impact echoed all over the empty tunnels, amplified by the walls and bounced back as reverberations. Toraku stayed sitting, his legs outstretched, and he leaned onto his two arms secured behind his back, out of the way in the shallow water. The blond boy blinked and stared into the newly opened passageway with wide eyes. It was empty. Empty and perfectly identical to where he was now, the same dull yellow lighting all the way down, the same brick pattern on the walls, and the same pipes running along the ceiling. Toraku narrowed his eyes and straightened to his feet. The sound of the waving water gently echoed toward the new passage in front of him. He moved his legs, and he felt the patterns of the still warm iron door with his bare feet. He slowly and carefully stepped onto it, watching as the small waves of his movement reached the doorframe and beyond it. He made one more hesitant step, then stopped. Again to stare again at the emptiness in front of him. He let out the air he didn't realize he was holding back, and determination ran across his face. His hesitant steps were replaced with confident strides toward the new corridor. Jiraiya watched with wide eyes as Toraku suddenly froze, his eyes snapped up, only the whites of them were visible. Kakashi immediately forgot about Kitsuchi and jumped to Toraku when he started to fall onto the hard ground. The Jounin gently placed his body down, panic running rampant through his mind, while he started to examine the teen. The Sannin crouched next to him to check him, and let out a relieved sigh. "It's okay. He just passed out from exhaustion. He's sleeping." "What did you give him?" The IWA Nin only blinked, still confused and stunned by the boy's previous statement, but didn't answer. The Sannin dangerously narrowed his eyes, still examining the blonde teen laying on the ground in front of him. "They probably gave him a lot of sedative. It's most likely an overdose. But with his healing abilities I don't think it will be a problem. He is just sleeping." Kakashi nodded, relieved, and his tensed muscles started to relax. Jiraiya looked back to the motionless commander, then moved his sight to the laying forms of the other unconscious enemy shinobi all over the field. "Make sure the others won't wake up." The Sannin gathered several sealing tags from his pouch and gave them to Kakashi. "Here, chakra binding and paralysis seals. Place each of them on their bodies while I notify Minato." Kakashi nodded and moved toward the shinobi after one last concerned look toward Toraku. Jiraiya sighed and summoned a small orange toad, who immediately disappeared after the Sannin finished his report to the Hokage. He bit his fingertip once more, and this time a much bigger toad appeared who, to Kakashi's horror, simply swallowed the 4 ninja and disappeared with a loud puff. "What did you do with them?" Jiraiya turned toward the shocked teen. "That was a prison toad. They were sent to the interrogation and torture department. Come on. We should take Toraku back to the post. Rin should check on that sedative, maybe she could extract it from his system." Kakashi nodded, while Jiraiya gently grabbed Toraku's limp body and headed back to the post. Toraku reached another passageway, this time a different one. The ankle-deep water disappeared and he found himself in a giant hall, which reminded him of a library. The place was filled with giant shelves, stretched out high to the ceiling, slumping under the enormous quantity of books, files, and scrolls. He shakily reached toward the nearest shelf and grabbed one scroll randomly. The blonde gasped when he read the title written with clumsy, childish hands, and his heartbeat increased. Academy Graduation. He squeezed his eyes shut, to ease away the increasing excitement. My memories. He slowly opened the scroll, and an image immediately popped up in his head. His younger self in a bright orange jumpsuit, sitting on a swing sideways. The beams of the sun pierced through the tree leaves, drawing abstract patterns on his slumped form. He was alone. Lonely and disappointed. Toriko shook his head, rolled back the scroll as fast as he could and put it back on the shelves like it was burning his skin. He looked down at his hands for a long minute, but curiosity surpassed his sadness. He hesitantly raised his hand and grabbed another scroll, this time from a different shelf, and without reading the title he rolled the scroll open. A new image flowed through his mind. He sat at a long counter, slurping his ramen, together with a pink-haired young girl and a raven black-haired boy. The same, but younger girl, from his memory. Sakura. That was her name. He gently rolled up the scroll and placed back where it was originally. He slowly ran his eyes over the titles, reading them randomly as he moved further and further along the shelves. Mission, Wave Country, Chunin Exam, Second Round. He spotted a more worn scroll than the others. The margins were tufted, the title almost unreadable because of the frequent use. Valley of the End. He hesitantly raised his hand, but he suddenly halted it in midair and shook his head. Toriko turned around slowly, examining the shelves and the enormous quantity of scrolls once more. He let out a breath and forced his legs to move, finally leaving behind his memories. The blonde passed by a much smaller and different pile of scrolls, tidily lined up behind the glass of a separate cabinet. He made a hesitant step toward it, before he nodded to himself and opened the twin glass doors of the showcase and read some of its titles. Rasengan, Raisin Shuriken, Frog Kata. An enormous temptation filled his mind, someone or something calling him, stroking him. The blonde slowly shook his head and without touching the scrolls he simply closed the glass doors and continued his way to the end of the hall, toward a giant vault. He reached it and found himself on the shore of a large patch with soft green grass, tenderly swinging together with the graceful branches of enormous osier trees. The blonde boy slowly closed his eyes, and he felt the same type of peace as in the passageway. He heard a soft rustle behind the giant forms of the willow trees, but he stayed still. He felt the warmth of a breath on his skin and a soft smile spread across his face. He slowly opened his eyes and blinked at the sight. The enormous face of an orange canine-like creature was facing him, his red eyes glowing, and he could see the giant razor-sharp canine teeth in its mouth. Despite the scene, he didn't feel panic, or fear, or any amount of unease. Only sheer curiosity. The giant eyeballs suddenly filled with irritation and annoyance and the canine narrowed his eyes. I'm pissed off beyond words. Tell me. How should I punish you? Excuse me? Toriko blinked in confusion and the giant canine became more irritated. You are unbelievably stubborn. Toriko scratched his cheeks and a small sheepish smile appeared on his face. That is true. Excuse me, but who are you? I should just tear you into tiny pieces, Naruto. What did you call me? The image of a slowly whirling fish cake popped up in his brain and confusion ran across his face, sweeping the obvious threat to the side about his possibly painful death. You mean the thing in ramen? The orange canine slowly shook its head and let out a frustrated snort. Idiot. It raised its giant form above him and the blonde blinked and stared at its countenance. He frowned and narrowed his eyes after he examined it from head to toe. His eyes twitched as he realized that the canine was actually a fox. A giant orange fox with a lot of .9 lazily flinging tails. You are a bijou. You are the Kyubi. What are you doing in my head? The fox let out a sigh and rolled his eyes in annoyance again, then a scary grin appeared on its face. It slowly held out its first leg, the animalistic paw with giant and also razor-sharp claws clutched into a fist-like position. Toraku blinked in confusion, staring at the giant orange and furry fist in front of him, which was actually twice as big as him. He glanced up at the fox, who only rolled its ruby eyes again and let out an irritated groan, like an impatient and furious child, then in the end waited for him to respond while restraining his obvious frustration. Toraku narrowed his eyes and unconsciously clutched his right hand into fist. When he realized what he did, he raised his fist and examined it with a frown on his face, then glanced up to the fox again. The canine only nodded, but the irritated and now impatient expression never left its face. Toraku hesitantly stepped closer, staring at his fist for a long minute, before he finally bumped it into the canine's own fist. For a moment nothing happened, then he felt a shockwave ran through the surroundings. The environment around them started to shake violently and the ground quaked under his feet, then it stopped as suddenly as it started. He blinked and stepped back from the giant fox. Toraku raised his head toward the face of the orange canine and a blank expression appeared on his face. After a long minute, staring blankly, he blinked and the emptiness immediately disappeared from his blue orbs, replaced with confusion. Kurama. The fox let out a relieved sigh and smirked. Finally. Naruto made a confused face and narrowed his eyes. What happened? We are back in the... How is this even possible? Unfortunately, killing you slowly and painfully will have to wait, because I fear you have got a show to perform. And some small advice, do not freak out, just go with the flow and play along. A jumbled expression appeared on his face before he felt a tug from the outside world. A groan left his mouth and a grimace appeared on his features when he started to feel the aching in his every muscle. A small and gentle hand moved a tuft of blonde hair from his face. He slowly opened his eyes and faced the soft smile of a brown-haired girl with 2 purple marks on each cheek. He blinked in confusion, then the memories about the girl flooded back to his mind. Rin. The girl chuckled and stroked away another tuft. I'm glad you are back. I was worried there for a second, you looked like you didn't recognize me. Well. He started to sit up, but an aching stab in his chest stopped his movements and a painful hiss left his mouth. Slowly. I just patched your broken ribs. It will sting a little. After a long minute he gathered himself and finally sat up in the hard bed. What happened? They gave you some kind of sedative. Much more than necessary. You would be in a coma if you and your body weren't as stubborn as you are. I was able to extract most of it. You were out for 3 hours before I could heal you. Hours? Confusion spread across his face and he blinked in surprise, while Rin chuckled and opened her mouth to answer, but the door suddenly burst open and a silver-haired young teen stepped into the room. I felt a chakra spike and Toraku. The blonde blinked and he felt as his mouth fell open at the scene. He stared at the boy for a long moment, then a gentle smile spread across his face, which in the end turned into a wide grin. What's up, Kakashikan? Naruto burst out laughing and had to clamp his arm to his side because a stinging pain appeared due to the relentless laugh forcing his freshly healed ribs to move, not to mention his sore muscles. The Jounin frowned and folded his hands in front of his chest in irritation. I see. So you are much better now. Naruto forced his mind to calm down but he still couldn't restrain all of the randomly bubbling chuckles. Sorry. Kakashi rolled his eyes, but moved closer to the blonde, examining him carefully with his one visible eye. Naruto then noticed a familiar scent and chakra signature and for a moment his heart forgot a beat, as the grinning Jiraiya stepped inside the room. Naruto distantly felt his lips part and his eyes started to sting, a lump forming in the back of his throat, but in the end he restrained the outburst of the overwhelming emotions racing through his mind. The sorrow, the relief, the doubt and in the end, the devastating joy. Welcome back, Gaki. It started to become boring without you around. Naruto slowly closed his eyes and a soft smile appeared on his face. Hey, Jiraiya. The Sannin stepped closer with a curious expression. He didn't miss the roller coaster of emotions on his face and the wave in Toriku's chakra when he stepped inside. What is it? It's good to see you again, Dadabayo. The soft smile never left Naruto's face and Jiraiya couldn't help but mimicked it. Dadabayo, huh? He spends too much time with Kushina. The blonde leaned forward on the bed, crossing his legs and focused his thoughts on the memories of the last 3 months. It felt strange, like they didn't belong to him. The memories of the last 3 months continuously appeared inside his head, and his confusion only increased with each new picture. The irritating feeling forced him to squeeze his eyes shut, and a groan left his sore body. His head was dizzy and his thoughts foggy. A confused frown appeared on his face when he found the somehow distant memory of the attack. When he opened his eyes once again, he was facing 5 orbs, examining him carefully. Rin moved closer and placed his glowing hand on the teen's head, carefully inspecting his state. You should rest a little. A small amount of sedative is still in your system. The next shift will arrive soon and we can head back to Konoha. Sleep and rest until then. It's okay, I can help. Naruto moved to get up, but he felt 2 small hands gently pushing him down back to the bed. No, you stay here. We will be fine. The way back to Konoha will be long and I doubt anyone wants to tote your unconscious body. Naruto let out a defeated sigh and finally nodded, sinking back to the bed. At least he could figure out what had happened. Jiraiya nodded and ushered out the 2 young shinobi, but he stepped back to the bed. Everything all right? Naruto raised an eyebrow, not sure what he was talking about. You looked like you saw a dead man when I stepped in. The blonde started to chuckle and slowly shook his head. Yeah, something like that. I was just relieved to see you in one piece. Jiraiya frowned, watching the teen for a long moment, then left the room after he nodded. The sage slowly closed the door and leaned against it. He folded his arms and started to stroke his chin, thinking about the reaction. Naruto let out a weary sigh and his orbs traveled toward the door, where he could still sense Jiraiya's disturbed chakra signature. He suddenly felt very tired, like after a whole day of training with an army of shadow clones and their collective exhaustion hit him when they disappeared. He rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand and let himself sink back to his mindscape to finally figure out what the hell was going on. Sleeping can wait, but this can't. He dragged himself to the nearest osier tree and slowly sank down to the ground, leaning against the raw surface. Kurama moved closer and laid down in front of him, his giant red eyes still filled with irritation. So, what the hell happened? If you couldn't figure it out by yourself with your pathetic human brain, we are in the past. To be exact, we have got a little more than 10 months until your birth. Kurama stated with an obviously annoyed tone. I don't get it. I really don't remember what happened. Are you really sure that bastard didn't get us with his Sharingan? The fox only rolled his eyes in annoyance. No, I'm certain. Everything feels too real to be a genjutsu. Everybody acts like they used to. It's too real and I already tried to dismiss it. Naruto shook his head. It is still more believable that Madara was able to create something like this, than time traveling. The last thing I remember from the fight with that bastard is that I hit him with my Rasengan, but after that it's just blank. I'm afraid I can't answer that. I also have no idea how on earth this could be possible. You are a bijou. The strongest of all. How could it be that even you don't know what happened? Naruto rubbed his head, forcing his brain to work, while Kurama narrowed his eyes. Why the hell did I even lose my memories in the first place? Naruto glanced up to Kurama, still rubbing his head in the hope that it would bring back the memories how the hell they got here. Kurama let out a sigh. You were acting like someone insane back in the hospital, so I thought it would be a good idea to evade some sensitive questions and gain some time. It was easy after you passed out. But as always, you messed up everything. Kurama let out a frustrated snort and looked away from the confused blonde. What did you do? I made a mental barrier for your memories, together with some of your sensitive knowledge. Naruto frowned. My knowledge? Just think about how would they react if you started throwing Raisengans, or you used my chakra, or your sage mode. That would just ruin my every effort to stay out from sight after your little scene in the hospital. But you messed up my plan. You made another barrier by yourself with your idiotic brain. Naruto raised an eyebrow. I wanted to dismiss the barrier when things calmed down after the interrogation, but you and your stubborn brain were stronger than I thought. I have to admit, I underestimated your will. You were denying your memories, and when I was finally able to push something out, to force you to release your mental block, you resisted like an insane every time I tried to break out. And by the way, you locked me up for 3 long months. Kurama barked the last out in anger while Naruto sent an apologetic smile toward the fox. Sorry. It wasn't intentional. The blonde folded his arms and crossed his legs, concentrating and thoughtfully tapped on his cheek. So you mean, when I, or rather Toriku, determined that he didn't want to remember, I made another mental barrier over yours? Kurama nodded as an answer. Naruto thought back to the fight with the Iwa Nines, when he saw the pure hatred in those eyes. In Kakashi's eyes and in Kitsuchi's eyes. Something broke in him. At that very moment he saw again when Ino died, when he tried to give shoulder to Sakura, when he promised her that he would bring peace. At that very moment, he determined that he would free the commander and Kakashi from the circle of hatred and bring peace. He understood it now. When he finally accepted his legacy, his memories, he stopped denying and shutting out Kurama's attempts to break out of his barrier. How typical. He was the one who messed up, the one restraining his own memories. Actually you made 2 barriers. The kitsune spit the words out like they were sour poison, and Naruto raised a confused eyebrow. I was finally able to almost dismiss your first one when the me and Kushina reacted to my presence back in Kumo. You were lucky I was able to push out enough chakra to heal your wound, thanks to my other self. That would have been a perfect cover for us. But no, you had to freak out, and lock me up again with that damn second barrier. Kurama stretched out his spine and placed his enormous head onto his crossed front legs and yawed, while his enormous red eyes flashed dangerously toward the young boy. You didn't help me either with that. Jeez. You acted like you wanted to tear me to shreds behind that damn door. How on earth wouldn't I freak out? You could have just told me that you were behind that damn door and I would have opened it immediately. You just don't understand how a mental barrier works. It was your projection and not me. When we are finally finished you should go see a psychologist. You are freaky. Like you got any right to complain about that. Kurama turned his head away from him with an irritated "ch," but Naruto already forgot about the insult and frowned. He'd still have the weekly checkups with Inoichi. So we are really in the past? Kurama only nodded and Naruto made a wondering expression, as the thought finally sank into his mind and he realized what that really meant. We can change things. The fox nodded again, watching Naruto as his face moved to an odd grimace by the overwhelming possibilities. You can. But if you change too much, you won't know what will happen. Maybe you already messed up something important. Naruto nodded in understanding, but the wide grin never left his face. There is so much in my mind. But I know one thing for sure. We have to get the real Madara while he is weak. Rin's alive, so Obito must be still himself. If we get to him in time, everything will be all right. You won't devastate Konoha, Mom and Dad won't have to die and... Naruto froze for a moment. They won't have to die. They are alive. They are still alive. A relieved, tender smile appeared on his face, and he slowly raised his hand and touched the place where he remembered Kushina had placed a gentle kiss on his forehead, when they had met for the first time. Kurama rolled his eyes and barked toward Naruto. Erase that idiotic expression from your face. This is serious. Naruto shook his head and desperately tried to concentrate on their problem. So what do you think we should do? Keep a low profile. I don't think it's a good idea to do that again and shut out who you are. And absolutely not before you've been conceived. I really don't know what would happen to you if that didn't occur. Naruto furrowed his brows. What will we do about Inoichi? Kurama rolled his eyes. I will take care of that problem. Naruto narrowed his eyes and suspiciously eyed his fluffy tenant. If you could take care of Inoichi, why the hell did you lock out my memories in the first place? Because you were acting like an insane and on the verge of going rogue, the others would have killed you. Even the third was tense. I thought it would be best if you took a long rest until I figured out what we should do. And not to mention, with that small little act from me you gained a new identity. What do you think? How on earth would you answer to the interrogators? You would never be able to deceive them. I just gave you a perfect cover. Plus it was fun. At least for the first 2 weeks. The last part of the sentence died to a frustrated grumble. Naruto couldn't help it and burst out laughing, but he immediately stopped when a razor-sharp claw landed between his legs and the red eyes glowed dangerously. The blonde gulped and sent an apologetic look toward the fox. And what did you figure out in the last 3 months? Nothing, because you locked me up and I was occupied with trying to break your stupid mental barriers. The bijou snorted with fury and Naruto chose not to poke him more. What if we just tell everything to Gigi? Or to Jiraiya? He trusts me. Minato won't need to know until I'm conceived. Kurama slowly shook his head and he finally removed his fang dangerously close to his legs as a last warning. This Hiruzen isn't the same one you knew. He would immediately send you back for another round of interrogation and I doubt they would be as gentle this time as they were. In this time, he saw you as a possible treat if you didn't notice already. And Jiraiya, you know very well that the only reason he is your sensei now is to take you out if you go rogue. Plus think about it. Would you believe your own story? That you are from the future? Besides, it's almost New Year's Eve. You should be conceived soon if you haven't already messed that up. Naruto nodded, agreeing, but his heart squeezed when he thought back to the suspicious and cold eyes of the third. He missed the old Hokage. Not this one here in this time, that one who looked at him with care and love. The blonde let out a weary sigh and his thoughts migrated toward his parents. I think my parents are getting on well. Naruto tilted his head and made a wondering look, earning a disgusted snort from the fox. Don't remind me anything like that. I'm not interested in that kind of stuff. This will be more problematic than I first thought. Kurama nodded and stretched out. Leave now. I'm worn out. It was a pain in the ass to get rid of your stupid mental barriers. Naruto nodded, got up and tapped the paw of his orange friend, who let out an irritated snort as an answer. A knowing smile appeared on his face. Kurama would never admit that he was relieved to see him again, moreover happy, but he knew how to read between the lines. After all these years and still acting like the frightening Kyuubi. Naruto stretched out his arms and let the fox alone, not aware of the small smile that spread across Kurama's face, and he let out a relieved sigh. Idiot brat. Kurama muttered quietly and turned around to finally get a well-deserved nap. Naruto slept for 3 hours, before he got up, changed his clothes and started to look for the others. It only took a second after he spread his chakra around to find everybody on the roof. He stretched his still aching muscles and headed toward the roof of the post. Morning again. The three looked toward him as he dragged himself over the side of the roof and groaned when his sore muscles almost squeaked by his movement. Kurama. Could you speed up the healing a little? I'm sleeping. Bear it. It's not like you will die because of it anyway. Naruto let out an irritated ch, thankfully no one noticed it. How are you feeling, Toraku? Rin moved closer to Naruto, who sat down on the edge and started to massage the aching muscles in his leg. Fine, discounting that my body feels like lead. Rin only nodded. That's mostly because of the sedative. Kakashi turned toward the blonde and folded his arms in front of his chest. What happened before we arrived? Naruto placed his right ankle to his left knee, massaging his calf and frowning while he gathered his thoughts to answer. It's a little bit foggy before you appeared, but maybe half-hour before you came I woke up. Thankfully they didn't notice it, so I had some time to gather myself. You should have seen their faces when I kicked their asses, Dadabayo. Kakashi only rolled his eye in irritation. You were barely able to stand straight when we got there, so don't draw the long bow. Naruto only shrugged. Okay, I made 5 pathetic clones, they released me, then I agonized behind a wobbling barrier for 10 minutes before they beat the crap out of me. Satisfied? Naruto folded his arms and turned away from Kakashi with a pout, sulking like a kid. Jiraiya watched him carefully and his doubts about him started to ease as he saw the very familiar reaction. You've done well. He moved closer and ruffled his blonde locks. The sulky expression immediately melted away from his face, replaced with a smile. Thanks for coming after me. His 3 comrades raised an eyebrow, but didn't answer until Jiraiya let out a small chuckle. You know, I don't want to think about what Minato would do to me if I had lost you. A cheeky smile appeared on Naruto's face. I got some ideas for a proper punishment for you if that ever happens. The blonde chuckled and Jiraiya grimaced in annoyance. Cheeky little brat. He folded his arms and turned away from the blonde, whose chuckle only raised by the childish reaction he missed so much. He finally let out a sigh, watching the back of the Sannin with a warm expression until he slowly closed his eyes. You will die because of your old age this time. I swear. Minato Namikaze, the 4th Hokage, stood motionless behind the two-way mirror, staring at the unconscious Iwa Kunoichi next to the table, leaning against her bonds in the chair. He was surprised that the woman bore the interrogation for this long. She was exhausted and unconscious when the prison toad arrived with them a little more than 12 hours ago. The medics healed her enough to regain consciousness after she was hit by a ration jutsu. She just blacked out again from exhaustion. Minato glanced toward Inoichi, who only shook his head slowly and left the room, leaving the kunoichi alone. Only a second after the door closed behind him, 2 ANBU appeared next to the woman, but within the next second they were gone together with the captive. The Hokage turned his head toward the interrogator who stepped inside the observing room. She was too exhausted. I didn't have enough time to even reach her memories before yesterday. Inoichi turned toward the worry-filled face of Minato. Don't worry. Toraku is okay. I may not have been able to reach her older memories, but you should be proud. He fought hard. Besides some cracks on his pride and some bruises, he is okay. A small smile appeared on Minato's face. I know. He is strong. But I'm worried, how could this even happen? The Hokage stared inside the empty room for a long minute, then the leading interrogator Makoto stepped inside the observation room and stopped next to the blonde leader. Hokage-sama. Inoichi could continue with the commander. I'm finished with him. Unfortunately, he is well trained. The only thing I could get out of him was his name and his rank. Kitsuchi, second commander of Iwa's Shinobi forces. I think it's time for us to step it up to the next level. Makoto tuned toward Inoichi, while Minato nodded and made a short chain of hand signs. An ANBU appeared next to him, with a light bow. Hokage-sama. Bring the commander inside. The ANBU nodded and disappeared from the small room without a word. The Hokage let out a weary sigh and massaged the bridge of his nose with closed eyes, waiting for the ANBU to finally bring the commander. After a long minute of silence, he opened his eyes, watching as the ANBU reappear with the captive, securing him to the chair, and disappear from the room after he finished. Minato slowly turned toward Inoichi and nodded, giving a silence order to the man. The yellow flash of Konoha watched the process with thoughtful eyes, waiting patiently for the interrogator to finish his work. Minato stayed motionless for a long hour, fixing his gaze on the two men on the other side of the glass. Inoichi finally opened his eyes, and stepped back from the heavily panting captive. The clothes of Kitsuchi were soaked with his sweat, sticking onto his brawny body. His brown eyes moved toward the mirror, eyeing his own panting reflection while he tried to catch his breath. The IWA Shinobi shook his head to ease away the dizzy feeling in his head. He fought hard with the interrogator, but in the end he failed and the blonde shinobi easily slipped through his defense. His training was almost useless. When he faced with the technique of Inoichi, and the chakra bidding seals placed on his weary body weren't helping him either. Numbness started to spread across his mind, he felt the world slip to the side when his head started to spin. The sensation finally died down after a long minute, which felt like eternity, and the commander braced himself and straightened his body. Minato watched the scene, waiting for Inoichi to finally step inside the observation room and reveal what he managed to learn from their captive. He observed the shinobi in front of him, his fight to stay conscious, almost losing his battle, then in the end he finally straightened with pride in the seat. The interrogator stepped inside the room and the Hokage eyed him from head to toe. He looked obviously weary and exhausted. The Yamanaka clan's technique doesn't require a great amount of chakra, but more continuous concentration and control. Report. Minato stayed professional with his friend. Despite the fact that they'd become much closer after Toriku's sudden appearance, this is a serious situation. The Yamanaka took a seat to gather his thoughts for a short second with closed eyes, before he answered. The operation was discreet, only him, his team and the Tsuchikage know about it. However, it seems that he received only the most necessary information, which is odd. He is the second commander of IWA, a high-level shinobi, furthermore the relative of the third Tsuchikage. Inoichi let out a weary sigh, while a frown appeared on Minato's face. Relative of the Kage. This could mess up everything. Or this could be an advantage. It would depend on how he used his cards. The voice of Inoichi pulled him out of his thoughts. It seems the old geezer does not trust him enough to reveal everything about his future plans. They were just operating. What is worrisome, they already knew about Toriku's mission the day our team departed from Konoha. This wasn't just an accidental opportunity they utilized. It was planned well in advance. Inoichi let out another weary sigh and the frown became deeper on Minato's face. I'm sorry Minato, despite his heritage they were just small fries. I found nothing who leaked out the information about their mission. Minato nodded, his eyes fixed on the commander inside the interrogation room. Take a rest Inoichi. I want a full report when you wake up and a full mind screen tomorrow. Maybe he's still storing some interesting information not concerned with this case. Inoichi nodded and left the room after a bow toward his friend and his respected leader. Minato waited for a long moment and without a second thought, he left the room and entered the one behind the glass tenanting the IWA commander. The shinobi stiffened when the yellow flash of Konoha stepped inside the room, fixing his azure blue orbs on him, examining him from head to toe. Minato stayed calm, and he slowly moved closer to Kitsuchi with an emotionless face. A shiver crawled up the commander's spine when he felt the drops of cold sweat slowly run down his back, while he forced his body to move and look up to the man who stood above him. Hatred took over the fear in his weary mind. His dark eyes started to burn with the flames of hate, his face turned into a mask of anger. His dark eyes locked with the azure-blue orbs of the feared Shinobi, the man who was directly responsible for the death of his wife and hundreds of his comrades. A soundless battle started between the two men. A battle of wills. The one to break eye contact first would lose. The sting in Kitsuchi's eyes increased, but he forced down the urge to blink. His eyes darkened when the picture of his laughing wife popped up in his mind, replaced by the image of his daughter, the small and fragile form of Kuratsuchi, who will grow up without a mother and maybe without a father. The dark eyes become haunted behind the flames of hatred, behind the urge of vengeance. Suddenly the emotionless mask of the Hokage melted away, sadness spread across his face and his ocean-blue orbs mirrored only pity toward the captive. Kitsuchi suddenly felt himself back at Kusa, lying in the dirt, his body secured with wires, glancing up to a very similar blonde shinobi. The same look, the same sparkle in their eyes, the same pity. Did you lose someone in the war? The IWA commander flinched when Minato's voice reached his ears and immediately averted his gaze, mentally cursing because of his softness, but the increasing sorrow slowly pushed out his other emotions. They stayed in complete silence for a long minute, before Kitsuchi's weary and cracking voice broke it. I did. Then why? Why do you and your Kage threaten the peace between our nations? The IWA shinobi stayed in silence. Despite the vicinity of the man who had caused his pain, his suffering, and his mourning for his family, his hatred had simply wilted, the last bit of his burning hatred faded away, leaving him in the deep abyss of sorrow. Kitsuchi forced his emotions to the back of his head, burrowing them deep inside his mind, locking away the picture of his wife, his brother-in-law. He didn't move his head as he fixed his gaze on the streaks and curves of the wooden table in front of him. Talking about peace, while your hands are covered with blood. With the blood of my wife and hundreds of others. You and your brother are hypocrites. Minato stayed silent for a long minute, his eyes fixed on the profile of the commander in front of him. We are shinobi. Our hands, our souls are soaked in blood. The only thing that could wash it away and stop the circle of hatred is peace. With this, Minato turned around and left the room without looking back at the confused Kitsuchi. Traveling back to Konoha was equal of torture. While they reached the post in one day, the way back to Konoha lasted almost two, because of his sore muscles and messed up chakra system. Kurama wasn't in a hurry to heal them completely, and Naruto got the feeling that this was his punishment for locking him up behind those barriers. The feared Bijou, the nine-tailed demon fox, was sulking like a small kid inside his mindscape, refusing every interaction. Well, he couldn't blame him, but it was still annoying to stop every 2 or 3 hours to rest at least 30 minutes on the first day, mostly a result of his trembling legs. Thank Kami Kurama came to terms with him on the first night in the forest, and after a long hour of pleading he finally started to heal them properly. Aside from his annoyance at the almost continuous ache in his limbs, he was thankful for the 2-day delay before he arrived back in Konoha. His thoughts moved back to Sakura and he finally realized that his friends, almost every one of his friends, didn't exist here. At least not as he knew them. Kakashi was here, not much different from the adult one. Jiraiya, well, he was the same wonky pervert he remembered and loved so much. But the others didn't even know about him. Most of them weren't born or even conceived yet. No old friends. However, there were no insane, megalomaniac, immortal Uchiha and no brainless monsters with 10 tails. Only a snake and hopefully a very old and weaker version of Madara, without that annoying ability to rebuild his body countless times. He shook his head. He would have enough time to carefully think over everything when they reached Konoha. He needed to rest after this mission for sure, and it would provide a great opportunity to settle down to plan what he would need to do. And how? A sad smile appeared on his face as he watched the back of the Sennin in front of him. He slowly turned his head to the right where, at that moment, Kakashi hopped on a branch to jump to another one. The sadness slowly faded away and a grin spread across his face. Seeing his long-dead perverted sensei was a shock, seeing Kakashi as a teenager, maybe around 14 or 15, was fun. Poking him continuously was just priceless. A thought started to form in his mind of how he would kick his ass during their next spar, and a devilish chuckle echoed in his mind at the thought. How should he get vengeance for the indignity of the 1,000 years of pain technique? Kakashi frowned when he glanced toward the grinning Naruto. What? Nothing, just daydreaming. The Jounin narrowed his eyes suspiciously when Naruto burst out laughing with a small evil hint in his voice. He let out a satisfied sigh and the numb smile never left his face. He was so happy. So calm, relieved, a sensation he hadn't felt for a long time. He felt like he found something he lost a long time ago, his old self, his cheerful, big-mouthed, joking self. Enormous amounts of thankfulness flushed through him toward someone he'd never even met or known. Toraku, thank you. He just wanted to enjoy this peace around him for a bit more. Konoha was here, with all her pride. His loved ones all alive, and he would be sure that they stayed that way, along with everybody he cares for. They will bear a new and better future. Determination appeared on his face and he jumped forward yelling to the world, punching the air, not bothering himself with the confused looks behind him. He got a second chance and there was no way on earth that he would fail. The gates. Naruto slowed down, almost stopped, but when Jiraiya sent a raised eyebrow toward him he just grinned back and continued his way toward the two giant wings. A nostalgic feeling raised inside him when he looked toward the small post next to the gate, looking for a black-haired Chunin with a bandage running across his face and his ever-present companion with hair held down in front of one eye by his Hitayat. Suddenly he realized that they couldn't be here because they'd probably just graduated from the academy. He glanced toward the desk and found two shinobi behind it, as per usual, but the scene forced him to blink. A very young, very scarless, and very bored Marino Ibiki faced their direction, at the edge of falling asleep with his head in his palm. A cheeky smile ran across Naruto's face at the sight of the feared interrogator of Konoha. Jiraiya slowly shook his head and moved closer to the interrogator, who finally turned toward them and let them pass after a quick chat. They reached the Hokage tower within minutes and Naruto became more and more nervous. He was going to meet with his father. Okay, I already met with him hundreds of times. No, it wasn't me, it was Toraku who met him. Okay, just calm yourself or they will think you got back your memories. Naruto suddenly stopped and palmed his forehead, cursing to himself, while he heard the chuckle of Kurama in the background. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow, but didn't make a comment, however he noted it as another weird act after the incident with IWA. They stopped when they reached the doors of the office and Naruto forced himself to calm down when he sensed the chakra signature of his father on the other side of the door. He let out a long breath, but before they could open the door, it burst open and Minato stepped out from it, eyeing him worriedly, then clutched Naruto's hand and literally dragged the gaping boy into the office, flushing away every bit of weariness by the sudden movement. Naruto looked blankly at his father's narrowed eyes, before sneaking a peek toward Jiraiya who shrugged in response. Minato. The Hokage snapped his eyes toward Naruto's confused face and a relieved smile ran across his face. The blonde waved toward the empty chairs and they finally moved to sit down. Minato watched them carefully, one by one. Naruto exploited Minato's focus on the others to carefully examine his living and breathing father. His eyes, his features, his hair, his scent, the sound of his heartbeats but moreover, the warm feeling of his chakra. It felt so alive, so powerful, yet still soothing, harsh, yet childishly playful like a warm spring breeze ruffling his hair. Teasingly. He heard the muffled voice of Kurama at the back of his head, but it became more and more distant, until it finally died down completely. His consciousness spirited away from the office, he could only see and smile to the face of Minato. The familiar face, looking back at him like he was an idiot. Naruto blinked and turned his head in the office to see that everyone was looking at him with an odd expression, waiting for something from him. He raised his hand and scratched his cheeks and a sheepish smile ran across his face. Sorry. I kind of spaced out. Minato rolled his eyes and let out a weary sigh. I said that I will need a detailed report from you about what had happened. Oh. Okay. Are you sure you are all right? You look kind of I don't even know how can I describe it. Musing? Kakashi offered the word and Minato nodded, while Naruto only scratched his head. Well, yeah. I've been feeling kinda funny, you know. But I'm okay. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes and made a knowing look to Minato, who noticed the meaning immediately. The sparkling in his eyes immediately paled, but not to a noticeable level. At least not to anyone who wasn't looking for it, but Jiraiya had seen it. Minato let out a sigh and started to massage his forehead. Okay. You are dismissed. Toriku, I'll check on you later. Jiraiya, a minute. The three young shinobi left the office after a short goodbye, and Naruto glanced toward his father for a last time before he closed the door with a small smile on his face. Minato stood up and moved in front of the desk and sat on the top of it, eyeing Jiraiya curiously. I would recommend a checkup with Inoichi as soon as possible. Minato narrowed his eyes to the Sennin. Why? He's been acting strange in the last 2 days while we were traveling. He was too quiet, and he spaces out all the time, even when he's looking at something. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, and I really hope I am. But Rin also told me something strange. When he first woke up, she thought he didn't recognize her. Plus, when he saw me right after that, I really thought I couldn't even place his reaction. I really don't know, maybe it is only because of the sedative, or the after effect of what happened to him, but I suggest you make him an appointment. For safety's sake. Minato let out a weary sigh and walked to the wide windows of his office, eyeing his old team on the square in front of the Hokage tower, watching when Toriku obviously made a poke to Kakashi, who angrily tried to snap the blonde on the back of his head, but he easily evaded the playful attempt, laughing and pointing toward the young jounin. Minato closed his eyes and let out another sigh, as they disappeared behind a corner. Make it so. Talk to Inoichi, I will bring Toriku in half an hour. I want to be there. The Sennin nodded, however Minato still showed his back to him. Minato. I really hope this is just my imagination, but if it's not. Minato's eye twitched, but he nodded, still not showing his face to his once sensei. When Jiraiya finally left the office without a word, he leaned his forehead on the window, resting it on its cold surface in the hope that it would calm his burning thoughts and raising fear. Shit. Minato let out a sigh at the doorstep of Toriku's apartment. He could feel the calm chakra signature of his brother inside the small bedroom, probably sleeping, and now he was here to drag him to Inoichi. The Hokage closed his eyes and hardened his own emotions for the sake of the village, then knocked on the pale orange door. He felt a small spike of chakra when the blonde finally woke up, and he felt as he slowly moved toward the door. He couldn't help it, a warm smile appeared on his face when he faced with two sheepish, blue eyes, under a very untidy mess of blonde hair. His eyes were only halfway open, still foggy by his dream, and a wide yawn left him when he opened the door to Minato. Hi. It's not like I'm not happy to see you again, but is something wrong? Naruto blinked sleepily toward Minato. Sorry, but there is something that can't wait. Naruto stretched out his arms and yawned before he stepped out of the way to let Minato enter. Naruto scratched the back of his head, blinking continuously to ease away his weariness. I'm really sorry, but we need to visit Inoichi. It's a routine for everyone who has been captured. Naruto blinked and his foggy brain immediately cleared, but unlike Minato's expectations, it mirrored only annoyance and not fear or betrayal. A small web of relief spread toward his thoughts. Couldn't we make it right after we had arrived? If you got doubts and think that the IWA means messed up something in my already messed up head during their little hospitality, why didn't you just say it right then? Man. I really got a sweet dream this time. Minato couldn't find any inconsistencies, couldn't tell that he was no longer looking at Toriku. Naruto had little trouble putting on Toriku's cheerful act. He had worn the jolly mask since childhood after all. He had made and started to wear the mask of cheerfulness long ago, even when the only thing he wanted to do was to just crawl into a corner and cry. The ability to put on such an act was so automatic that he could put a real actor to shame. With time, his mask had transformed into real happiness, but if the mask was ever needed, it was easily put into place. Acting outside his real feelings and putting up a mask to hide his real emotions was one thing. Lying to them was another. Lying straight to Minato's face that he wasn't sure he could do that. While his appearance showed simple annoyance, his thoughts raced with each other, running through several possibilities as he suppressed his starting panic. They know. Just play along. I will take care of the rest. If you think they might discover that you're lying, just change the subject or act like the idiot you are. Naruto restrained a retort. Instead, he yawned one more time and slowly walked back to the bedroom to grab a t-shirt and pants, pulling them onto his body, and walked casually back to Minato. Can we use your Hiration this time? I'm really not in the mood to drag myself to the other side of the village. The fourth chuckled as a soft smile spread on his face. He placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder and they were gone in a blink of an eye from the empty apartment. Inoichi was already waiting a little nervously in the familiar room of the interrogation and torture department, leaning against the wall with closed eyes. When Jiraiya appeared at his home, requesting an out-of-turn checkup on Toriku, he felt his heart stopped for a second. He let out a sigh and folded his arms in front of his chest. In the last month he had really befriended the cheerful blonde. They even met outside their weekly checkups for a ramen. To his surprise, Toriku was encouraging him when he finally confessed that he wanted to run a small business, and his wife continuously suggested a flower shop. It didn't matter how awkward it was that the leading interrogator was interested in flowers, Toriku never showed anything else than some small joke about it. But now that he really hoped it was only a false alarm due to the IWA scum he'd worked on before. He would really miss the boy if he regained his memories, and it pointed toward him being a threat to Konoha. Inoichi let out a sigh, and at that moment the door opened and Minato stepped inside the small room together with the smiling Toriku. Relief ran through Inoichi as he watched the still cheerful teen, calling him Ajizan, waving his hand enthusiastically. Toriku-kun, take a seat. I will be fast, I promise. The blonde nodded, still smiling, and just hopped down to the chair and closed his eyes. Inoichi stepped closer, placed his hands on Naruto's forehead and felt a small vibration as a shiver ran through the blonde's body when he entered the well-known mindscape. The interrogator quickly passed by his basic knowledge without pause to enter the door, hiding the boy's memories. The landscape had changed a lot since his first visit. Unlike his first time in the White Zen Garden, his mindscape slowly changed little by little with each visit. For the second time, the sky became bluer. During his third visit he found small blades of green grass here and there, under the soft white sand, stretching out toward the azure blue sky and the puffy clouds. During his last visit, there were several bigger green spots slowly blending together, and he was sure with time, the white sand, the ruins of his old memories, would disappear under the already slowly growing meadow, spotted with wild flowers. Inoichi stepped onto the soft grass, watching as it slowly rolled in the warm breeze, and the scent of lilies immediately hit his nose. He quickly took in the sight of the green fields, making a note to himself about the fewer and fewer white dunes here and there, and finally moving toward the increasing amount of shelves a little ways from the door. The interrogator walked through a small field, filled with dandelions, his footsteps stirring the white balls and filling the air puffy parachutes as they slowly whirled around his head, playfully circling his body. Just like last time, he ran his fingers through the titles and he let out a breath in his relief. He wasn't aware he was holding back, when he found the oldest date in a file. The day they first met. A smile ran across his features when he left Toriku's mindscape without a second thought to face the curiously shining blue orbs, completely unaware of the small, almost invisible wave in a small spot of the landscape when he dismissed his jutsu. It's okay. Nothing is messed up. A wide grin appeared on Naruto's face, but it was immediately replaced with a wide yawn. That's it, that was all you had to do? A genjutsu in my mindscape? Why didn't you just do that in the first place? Kurama let out an irritated snort. You are dense as always. If I'd tried to hide your memories it would have been obvious, and treated you as a threat. That, combined with the fact that you are a terrible liar, meant that that course of action was not an option. I still don't see why I can't just tell them the truth, Naruto mumbled to himself with a mental pout. Because they would think you are insane, or that you really are a threat. For example, if you just tell them information you shouldn't know, what would be their first reaction? That you are a damn spy. I'm not saying that with time you can't tell them, but now isn't the time. The less people know about you, the safer. If they know what's going to happen, then they're going to act differently and we can throw out our knowledge. That's why I've been telling you to keep a low profile. You could endanger someone's life, even their birth. Your own conception, for example. Naruto nodded physically, maybe a little too fast, and the two blonde men in the room mistook his movement as if his head dropped by his exhaustion. You look tired. Naruto blinked as he registered the room. Yeah, I'm gonna drop with fatigue. Can I go back now? Minato smiled as a great burden lifted from his shoulders and waved to his little brother with a soft, relieved smile on his face. Come on, I'll give you a lift. Minato clasped his arm around Toriku's shoulders and they were gone, leaving the blinking Inoichi alone without a word. The two blondes appeared in the middle of the apartment, and Naruto turned toward his bedroom, to finally get his well-deserved sleep, when he suddenly stopped and turned to the Hokage. Minato. He started softly, eyeing the floor, while the yellow flash of Konoha frowned. Next time, if your suspicions rise again, just ask me, okay? I know I was acting weird in the last 2 days, but I got a reason for that. You should have just asked. I will never harm you or Konoha. An apologetic expression appeared on Minato's face and stepped to his brother and placed his 2 hands on his shoulders. I'm sorry. For the biggest surprise, Minato stepped closer and his 2 hands met at Naruto's back in a tight hug. Naruto froze, his heartbeat increased, then finally he let his body relax, almost melt in the arms of his father. He hesitantly raised his own arms to hug back, but the moment was over and Minato stepped backward, releasing him, before he could finish his movement. Only frustration stayed in his mind and not the warm sensation which was there only a second ago. Naruto watched as the softly smiling Minato disappeared from his room. Rubbing his aching eyes with his hands, he let out a weary sigh and turned around to finally fall onto his bed with his clothes on and his mind blank. Meantime in the Hokage tower, Jiraiya paced back and forth between 2 walls, impatiently waiting for Minato's return with the results. His long, spiky, pure white ponytail swayed on his back with the rhythm of his not too graceful footsteps. The Sannin froze when Minato finally stepped inside his own office, and the yondaime noted the curious, concerned and demanding eyes of his teacher as he slowly walked toward his wooden desk and slumped into the soft chair. Jiraiya's nerves nearly tensed to the breaking point by the obvious stonewalling, but he mimicked his student and also slumped into the nearest chair with a revived sigh when Minato smiled and nodded. His memories are as missing as always. It was a false alarm. Jiraiya let out another sigh, but a frown appeared on his face. Then I really don't get his previous reactions and behaviors. Minato slowly shook his head. Me neither. But, when I talked with him now, I didn't find any suspicious reaction. Based on Inoichi's report, he reassured me that there is no way a mere human could hide anything from him when entering directly into the mindscape. Jiraiya nodded, but the frown stayed on his features when Minato changed the subject. How is the progress with his scroll? The frown deepened on Jiraiya's face and he rubbed the bridge of his nose. I'm still fighting with the last 2 parts. Minato nodded and they stayed in silence for a long minute. Their peace was interrupted a bit when a half-smile appeared on Jiraiya's face. You know what, Minato? When he quoted again from my book at Kyumo, I believed in him. Minato mirrored the small smile. Yeah, that I know what you mean. The first beams of the rising sun slowly stroked his forehead, until it reached the line of his eyes. The eyelids twitched at the uneasy feeling, and his mind started to process his surroundings as the sleep slowly started to fade away and the fog cleared away from his brain. Naruto let out a frustrated groan and bore himself further into the soft pillow to evade the stinging light in his eyes. He stayed motionless for a long minute in a hope to shift back to sleep, but he finally gave up. An enormous yawn left his mouth as he turned on his back, stretching out and scratching his belly under the rumpled shirt. I thought you would never get up. Lazy bastard. How long I was out? For 16 hours. It's almost 7 in the morning. I'm bored to death. Naruto chuckled and sent an apologetic thought back to his never-missing companion. I was exhausted. Naruto frowned and sank into his mindscape to talk with Kurama, who rested his head on his giant paws. We should start to think out a plan. The fox only nodded. There are a lot of things we must take care of. Obito is out there, maybe already influenced by that bastard. Nagato may still be himself and Yahiko's still alive. Tsunade is out of the village, Shikaku may already be sealed inside Gaara in his mother's womb. The other Jinchuriki and the Bijou, Orochimaru, the Uchihas, the Hyugas. Naruto scratched his face, still frowning as he buried himself in his thoughts. We should eliminate Obito and Madara as soon as possible, that must be the first priority. Everything else can wait. Naruto frowned and sat down in front of Kurama's crossed legs, leaning his chin on his palm. Madara could be anywhere. Maybe far away from the borders. We know only about 3 times when we could strike. When Rin dies, after Yahiko's death in AIM and your birth. Just leave things as they should be. Our best chance is on the 10th of October. At that time, only Obito will be alive, and he alone is an easier fly to catch than the 2 together. Naruto stayed in silence for a long minute, his face moved into an emotionless mask before it mirrored only sadness. His soft voice filled the landscape around him. You speak about greater good. Sacrificing Rin, Yahiko, shoved Kakashi into despair, Obito and Nagato into insanity, risking the life of my parents, maybe hundreds who could be killed when you appear in Konoha. Let Orochimaru act free for almost a year. Who knows how much blood will strain his hands? Civilians, children. I can't just sit and wait. You can't weigh human life that easily. Maybe hundreds' lives for the lives of thousands. An acceptable sacrifice. I can save them without sacrificing anybody. I must. You can't save everyone. You are still the ideologist, and you are still underestimating me. We got a lot of time. Almost a year. You already changed a lot of things. Naruto frowned and nodded. Be met only once with Minato, Kitsuchi never got caught by Konoha, and who knows what other small things he had already changed that would influence the outcome by his mere presence. We have to remake the Shinobi alliance. That must be done in time. The fox let out a doubting snort. Humans are different this time. The alliance formed only because there was a common enemy. This time, there is no one. There is. They just didn't know about him. Kurama narrowed his eyes. What's on your mind? Naruto slowly shook his head, also not sure himself. I don't know yet. But the alliances between the nations must be tightened. The time is perfect for that with the peace talks. Naruto looked down to his hands, gathering his thoughts, prioritizing the upcoming events that he knew about. Let me remind you of something. You aren't the politics type. It requires a calm head, and that is what you lack the most. You can act politely only if your life depends on it. Sometimes that threat wasn't even enough. Kurama snorted and shook his head. For now, just stay out of sight until we have a decent plan. We must focus on Madara. Naruto slowly nodded and rose from his position and left his mindscape. I know. He whispered softly, glancing out his window toward the blue sky. A long scroll lay on the mahogany desk, shrouding its fine surface from the eyes. A man in black and gray robes examined its content with narrowed eyes. The report about his last attempt to get rid of a possible threat to Konoha. Danzo slowly rolled up the scroll and placed it on the corner of his empty desk. The old veteran closed his visible eye and stayed motionless for long minutes while he considered his last move, to prepare a new one. His spies and undercover men all over the village report every move of the suddenly appeared new Chunin. His relationship with the Namikes was never announced officially, but thanks to a very useful nurse in the hospital, Danzo received copies of the blood test results. Brothers. The council member frowned at the thought when he sent out this information to IWA, together with his report and the date when the boy would be near the borders. He really hoped that they could get rid of him, and immediately it would also open a new gate for him to finally take his seat as the Godame. It was supposed to be a clean job, without any connection to him, but of course they were incompetent. No foreign shinobi could surpass his elites. The frown deepened on his already wrinkled face. If you want something to be done, you have to do it yourself. The war veteran rose from his seat and left the room. The muffled voice of his long robes as the hard textile rubbed against each other was the only sound, not even his footsteps echoed in the forsaken passageway. Naruto stood still in front of a familiar door which led to his neighbor. He felt two familiar chakra signatures inside the apartment, one man, who he already met personally, and another one, soft, warm and flawless like the finest silk. His arm hesitantly moved toward the door, only to stop there before he could knock. A worried sigh left his soft lips and he forced his muscles to finally move. Two muffled knocks was all he could manage to force out of his arm before it fell limply next to his torso. Naruto closed his eyes and an unconscious gulp forced itself down his dry throat, reminding him to wet his cotton-thick mouth and lick his deserted lips. A small chakra spike could be sensed inside the apartment, and light, almost soundless footsteps approached the door, which slowly opened and a blonde tuft stick out his head. A soft smile appeared on Minato's fine features and he immediately nodded toward Naruto, inviting him inside. The Hokage slowly raised a finger to his mouth, making the universal sign to be quiet. The young time traveler slowly nodded and moved inside the living room without a sound. Minato moved inside the kitchen and Naruto utilized the opportunity without a second thought. He peeked inside the bedroom and the scene forced a warm smile on his face. He moved a step closer and leaned against the doorframe to watch his sleeping mother for a long minute. Naruto felt like he was going to melt. The graceful figure of his mother would be burned inside his retina forever, the peaceful, almost childish expression on her face, the violently glowing crimson-red river of her beautiful hair, framing her face and her whole body on the bed, hugging a big pillow like a lover. Naruto watched as her chest slowly rose and sank, while a small tuft of her ruby-red hair swayed together with the rhythm of her breath in front of her soft lips. The overwhelming sensation of peace and safety flushed through him and he couldn't suppress an urge. He slowly moved closer, mindful not to make any noise, and crouched next to his sleeping mother. His hand rose automatically, and he gently swept away the ruby feather from her face. He carefully examined his mother's fine features. It was true that he looked very much like his father, their eyes, their hair color and style. But there were a lot of things he inherited from his mother. His chin more angled than Minato's, just like his mother's. His mouth was exactly the same as hers. When his fingers touched the soft, silky skin of her face. He felt an electrostatic sparkle jump toward him, but there was no pain or any uneasy feeling. Only a small tingling sensation in the tip of his fingers. Kushina flinched in her dreams, and a small frown appeared on her face. Her son slowly and gently stroked his fingers once more on her cheeks, and the frown disappeared, replaced with a soft smile. Her lips parted as a soft, almost silent snore left his mother, causing Naruto to chuckle. He couldn't restrain himself anymore, and he slowly leaned forward and placed a soft kiss on his mother's forehead and leaned back just in time before he felt a familiar presence in the door. He slowly turned his head to see his father replacing his previous position next to the doorframe, holding up 2 cups of steaming tea in both hands. Naruto nodded, sending a soft smile toward his sleeping mother before he left the room without making a sound, sneaking one last peek at his dreaming mother before he finally closed the door. Minato handed over one of the steaming cups to his son after they occupied the couch. The young blonde shinobi gratefully sipped from the hot liquid, enjoying as it slowly warming up his insides with closed eyes. "You look very satisfied," the Hokage pointed out, eyeing his partner while also sipping his hot tea. "I am satisfied. Databeo." Minato raised an eyebrow, however Naruto couldn't see it with his still closed eyelids. "Something happened?" The blonde teen shrugged, and he finally opened his eyes to lock with the identical ones of his father for a long minute before he opened his mouth to answer. "You could say that. It's because of your memory? About your legacy, isn't it?" That caught Naruto off guard, and he exhaled his breath loudly inside his mug, sending a large amount of the steaming liquid into his lap. The Hokage suppressed a laugh, while he watched his cursing brother, as he was desperately trying to clean off as much tea from his clothes and from the couch as he could. Toraku. Naruto distantly heard the name, but he recognized that Minato referring to him, only after a long pause. "The pervert talks too much." A gentle smile appeared on the Hokage's face. "I'm glad that you chose something this big as a goal. And also the same as me." Naruto looked back to him with a surprised face and a raised eyebrow. "The same? My goal is the same as yours. To bring peace. However, that I had chosen a smaller first step. My first goal is to bring peace to Konoha. Then I can move further to the other countries." "That's a nice goal." A half-smile appeared on Naruto's face, and his expression saddened in the end before he continued. "However, there are a lot of other people outside the village gates who also deserve peace in the other hidden villages. Shinobi suffering because of the war, because of the hatred and the vengeance burning inside them. The civilians." The young ninja slowly shook his head and sipped his tea with a wondering face, while his thoughts traveled to foreign countries in his memories, to the thousands of comrades who he fought alongside during the Fourth Great Shinobi War. Who sacrificed their lives for him, for the shinobi world, for the freedom and for the true life. "Minato, you're a smart man. You're the Hokage after all." The yondaime raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unusual seriousness in his voice. "Tell me, Minato. How could one man bring peace to the world? How can one man change the world?" The named blonde stayed in silence for a long minute, lost in his own thoughts before finally opening his mouth. "The world, our lives are as vast as an ocean. If you dribble only one drop of water in the middle, it will reach a great distance before it fades away. If you could convince more people, you will get more drops, and the echoes of the small waves could definitely reach the shores. Even a small drop of water can cause waves." Naruto stayed in silence, chewing his father's thought carefully. "I don't want small waves. I need a tsunami databeo." Naruto grinned back to Minato, who softly chuckled and waved a hand. "A tsunami? Well, you just need to make a bigger impact, I think. You are quite good at that already." The young man rolled his eyes and playfully flung his hand toward Minato, who easily avoided the attempt to smack him on the back of his head. The two blondes chuckled softly, careful not to wake up the woman in the next room. The two men stayed in silence, sipping their tea, before Naruto broke it. What happened with the IWA ninjas? Minato raised an eyebrow at the sudden question. They are at the interrogation and torture department. But unfortunately they are just small fries. The blonde Chunin slowly rubbed his finger on the edge of his cup. Why didn't they go after the others? Why was I the only target? Minato let out a sigh and leaned back on the couch, resting his cup on his stomach while a frown appeared on his face. Their mission was only to kidnap you. Somehow they got word of our relation, despite the fact that it wasn't announced. What worries me is that they knew specifically that you are my brother, and not just a relative. That information is classified, only a small number of people have access to it. Furthermore, the Hokage closed his eyes, and his eyebrows connected to one continuous line. They knew about your mission. They weren't just wandering around. It was a very well-prepared ambush. Naruto sipped the last bit of his tea and leaned back on the couch after he put his cup on the table, mimicking the frown on his father's worried face. I couldn't understand what IWA could gain by my kidnap. Blackmailing the Hokage in the middle of the peace talks? What were they thinking? Minato slowly shook his head before he answered. Kidnapping or killing you wouldn't be just vengeance on me. It would be the demonstration of power toward the other nations. Minato let out a sigh and rubbed his forehead, before shaking his head again. You are suspecting that someone within the village informed IWA, aren't you? Minato didn't answer, or move, his face not mirroring any other emotions under his troubled frown, but that was enough for Naruto to take it as a yes. Someone is trying to debilitate you from inside the walls. The Hokage finally nodded. So it would seem. Naruto closed his eyes and leaned forward to rest his elbows on his knees, his head flung freely between his shoulders as his mind ran through several possibilities. Who were after power in Konoha, to sacrifice someone for the cause? The Hokage's personal council? No. They were mostly a big bunch of old hags, but they wouldn't dare to make a step like this. Plus Sarutobi is also part of it now. The Uchiha. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the thought, but he forced his brain to stay out of his memories of Sasuke and Madara. The Uchiha planned a rebellion, but that won't occur for almost another decade. Orochimaru had been after the Hokage hat for years before he defected from the village, but this wasn't his style. Naruto slowly shook his head to clear his thoughts, while he forced his brain to search for any hints in his memories, but nothing came. In the end, he let out a weary sigh. What will happen to them? Minato raised an eyebrow and turned toward his companion. Not sure who he was referring to. Finally he realized he was asking about the IWA prisoners. After the interrogations finished, the council will decide their fate. Thoughts raced inside Naruto's head with insane speed, looking for any possibilities to fix what he ruined. You are the Hokage. Minato frowned and narrowed his eyes, waiting for the blonde Chunin to continue. You can act beside the council. They were just following orders, like anybody else. Like you, months ago. Like me. Let them go. Please. Naruto turned toward Minato, his eyes almost begging and the frown only darkened on his face. Minato tilted his head to the side, eyeing Naruto carefully with narrowed gaze, but the blue orbs reflected wondering thoughts and nothing more as he considered his words. The Hokage straightened himself and slowly moved to the window and folded his arms behind his back. He ran his azure eyes along the village, the people walking on the streets, and his eyes finally moved toward the giant mountain in front of his window to meet his predecessors' faces. Why? Minato slowly turned around, watching his brother with a wondering face. I know I haven't got any right to ask anything like this. But I don't hold any grudge toward them. I understand them, even the attempt to kill me. I'm willing to forgive them. And if you think about it, Konoha could show mercy toward IWA, toward the Tsuchikage, and use it as a benefit during the negotiations. It wouldn't be seen as a weakness, rather the use of power of influence. Minato narrowed his eyes, frowning but considered every word of the blonde Chunin. You can benefit more if the Tsuchikage owes you one. Minato, please, if you are finished with them, let them go. I will consider it. Thank you. A relieved smile ran across Naruto's face. I didn't know you were interested in politics. It's a new passion of mine. A moment later, Naruto asked, I would like to meet with the IWA commander if it's not a problem. Minato tilted his head to the side, his eyes sparkled with curiosity. Why? Naruto only shrugged casually. We were interrupted in the middle of our conversation. Okay, I actually fainted. But I want to talk to him and finish it. Minato frowned, but nodded. Naruto answered with a nervous thank you and moved toward the kitchen to refill their empty cups with another round of the streaming liquid, while he tried to lock out the angry and disagreeing cursing of his tenant. Minato followed his movement with a wondering face. It wasn't suspicion that rose inside of him, since it was clear after the interrogation that Toriku had nothing to do with the IWA team. No, the feeling that welled up was awe. Awe that he was willing to forgive the kidnappers who had even tried to kill him. To top it off, it seemed to be the young ninja's natural instinct to save lives and rescue souls. The Hokage closed his eyes as he became lost in his own thoughts. Would I be so pure? No. I don't think so. I would utilize the opportunity to punish them. A large amount of respect built inside his mind toward the blonde Chunin despite his young age. Maybe you really could reach your goal. Minato watched his brother silently as he refilled their pot, and slowly brought it back, together with a third cup. The older blonde frowned, and at the moment he parted his lips to question it, he heard the soft ruffling of fine fabric inside the bedroom. Minato slowly shook his head, awe and pride sparkled in his blue orbs. I will never get used to your sensing skills, Otuto. Naruto answered with a wide grin as the sensation of pride flushed his mind by his father's compliment, and he placed the 3 cups onto the small table. The door slowly opened with a muffled squeak and a ruby-red bush appeared in the gap. Kushina stepped inside the living room, her eyes half open, her orbs still foggy from her previous dream. The young Chunin's heart started to beat faster as his mother slowly eyed him from head to toe. Her eyes slowly became wider and wider, until she burst toward him, almost sweeping them both to the floor. 2 soft arms folded around his frame, and this time he didn't hesitate to react. He returned the sweet embrace, clutching to her for a never-ending moment, enjoying as her sweet scent of vanilla filled his nose. He felt the heat of her body, the rough spots on her hands, caused by the use of the kunai, the rhythm of her heartbeat and her breath. He felt her ruby hair tickling his own face as Kushina bore herself more and more into his neck. Naruto slowly stroked his mother's back, while he glanced toward Minato from the corner of his eye to see the gentle smile on his father's features. Toriku. Naruto flinched, however the voice of his mother stroked his ears like fine silk. He gently stroked away a tuft of her ruby locks and leaned back to lock his azure blue orbs with his mother's eyes. He wanted to scream, to cry, and to tell them everything. I'm Naruto. I'm here. I'm your son. But the urge finally died down as his thoughts moved toward rationalism. Sadness and despair flushed in his eyes, but only for a moment, not enough time to be recognizable. Kushina. Is everything all right? He distantly heard his own voice as his lips moved. He still felt numb. It was strange. The first sight of his father, his living, breathing father, didn't cause this kind of reaction. Kurama's snort finally pushed him back to reality. Drama queen. That's my line, Databane. I was worried, but that idiot told me that you were tired and I couldn't go check on you. Naruto gently chuckled and took a step back. I'm all right. I was just exhausted. A wide, almost foxy grin appeared on his mother's face and Naruto couldn't suppress the urge to mimic it. Minato stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. When she heard you were kidnapped, she wanted to march to the borders by herself. A soft smile appeared on Naruto's face. I can take care of myself. I'm pretty strong, you know. Kushina only rolled her green eyes in her annoyance. You are. But just as your brother, you are also an idiot. Naruto chuckled, and glanced toward the irritated face of his father. I am the Hokage. Where is my respect? Kushina sent a cheeky grin toward her lover. You will get that respect if you will put your soiled underwear into the laundry basket. The Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato gaped like a fish, frozen in place without a word, flushed brilliant red even to his ears with embarrassment while the apartment echoed from the whinnying laughter of his son and Kushina. Naruto went through the familiar passages of the interrogation and torture department, where he had spent the first 2 weeks in the past after he finally woke up. He stepped onto the stairs, which leads to the basement, toward the cells of the 4 shinobi from IWA. He found himself facing a thick wooden door, covered with invisible security seals. However, he could still sense their presence by the tiny amount of chakra continuously leaking out from the pattern. He grabbed the handle and the seals glowed with a faint yellow light, examining the intruder, and in the end it had faded away. The door finally opened. He stepped into the passage and waved a hand to Makoto, who smiled and nodded to the blonde Chunin. He is in the last cell. When you're finished, just sign to the ANBU. Naruto nodded and moved toward the end of the passage without hesitation. During his past life, he had never been down here and it didn't match with his mental picture of this place. Instead of a dark passage, cells with rusty bars, he found himself in a bright corridor, with absolutely normal-looking doors containing a large glass window in the middle. The enormous number of security seals all across the passage was the only thing indicating prison cells. He finally reached the last door and glanced inside. It was very small and sparsely furnished room. He glanced at the IWA commander, who sat on the bed, his arms resting limply on his thighs, while his head hung freely on his giant chest. His big, brawny body was slumped, without any sign of the once proud commander of the 2nd Division of the Allied Shinobi Forces during the 4th Great Ninja War. Naruto let out a long breath and opened the door with a small spike of his chakra and stepped inside the cell. He instantly felt the effects of the security seals, as in a blink, his chakra reserve was locked up and his limbs felt numb due to the lack of it. No wonder Kitsuchi seemed so weary. Naruto made a hesitant step forward and cleared his throat to gain attention, but the once proud commander stayed in the same slumped position on the bed. The blonde rolled his eyes and moved to the chair next to a small table. Exactly which part of our previous conversation couldn't reach your brain? This isn't part of keeping a low profile. Kurama let out a frustrated snort, but Naruto just made a mental shrug and dismissively waved toward him. I know what I am doing. Just let me work. I doubt it. They stayed in silence for long minutes, until the IWA shinobi finally realized that he wouldn't get rid of the blonde boy by simply ignoring his presence. What do you want? Naruto leaned back and crossed his hands behind his neck, but inside his brain a satisfied smirk appeared. Nothing. Just thought you could bear a companion. A snort left the commander's nose and he finally raised his head to look at Naruto with a blank expression. Drop the act. What do you want? You aren't an interrogator. No, I'm not. I just want to talk to you and that's all. The blank expression melted away from Kitsuchi's face and a confused frown appeared on his features. He eyed Naruto for a long minute and averted his gaze from the piercing blue eyes, back to the floor. The blonde Chunin dropped his hands onto his own lap, before his soft voice filled the small room. What was her name? The eyes of the commander twitched, and his body flinched, almost invisibly, but he still fixed his eyes in front of him for a long minute before he opened his mouth to answer. Sumi. The voice of the IWA shinobi had died down to a whisper. I'm sorry for your loss, that I understand it. A skeptical "ch" was the only answer from the commander before he braced himself and barked out to the blonde. Don't act like you understand me. You are a shinobi of the leaf. You don't know me. My loss, my vengeance. My hatred. Konoha won the war, we lose. But next time it will be different. We will win the next war. IWA will become stronger. Naruto stayed in silence for a long minute, eyeing the tense Kitsuchi carefully. It doesn't matter where you come from. Stone or leaf, it won't matter in the end. Nor will it matter if you are from mist, cloud or sand. Nothing will matter. Your rank, your heritage won't be concerned by the Shinigami, it will indiscriminately reach out for everyone from a powerful Kage to a freshly graduated genin. I don't need to understand you personally. I understand the pain. The sorrow. It's common for everyone. The urge to protect your home and your loved ones. In war there are no winners, only survivors. This is what makes us the same. We are not the same. IWA is powerful. We will become more powerful and we will wipe you out. Tell me. Why did the war start? To seek power. But in the end, every nation only became weaker by the loss of its people. Only one thing can stop the terror of a war, and that is peace. This is what every human being, every man, child, woman and every shinobi is waiting for. We are shinobi. We are the same in more ways than you would ever agree. Will your vengeance bring peace to your soul? Kitsuchi stayed in silence for long minutes, and he finally looked up to meet the eyes with the young man. One man couldn't bring peace to the world. It's impossible. Naruto rose from the seat and stepped closer to the commander. Maybe. However, one man could start something and in the end reach the goal together. You, the Tsuchikage, the Hokage, the guard outside this door, we are small parts of a big domino chain. The question is, do we have the courage to finally start falling and change the shinobi world? You are insane. Naruto only shrugged and walked next to the door, knocking to the patiently waiting Anbu outside the door, who silently opened it and the blonde stepped out. Before the door could close, Naruto glanced over his shoulders and sent a wide grin to the once commander. Perhaps, but I have the courage to fall. Kitsuchi jerked his head up and blinked after the leaving blonde Chunin, staring at the closed door for a long time, lost in his thoughts. Naruto's foot automatically moved on the thin roads to his unknown destination. He fixed his gaze on the dirt of the streets, the corners of the business flags as he wandered the morning streets of Konoha. Civilians and shinobi passed his way, one or two waved a hand to him, a shinobi gently tapped his shoulders with a wide grin on his face and deep in his mind he recognized the man as a shin, a special jounin. They worked together 3 weeks ago next to the borders, to find the runaway child of a businessman. That mission should only be a C-class, without any danger, however the mercantile had eagerly paid the fee of an A-class mission and requested the best censors to find his daughter. And Minato granted his wish. They found the girl near Yugakure in one of the bathhouses, enjoying her free time not so alone, and Toriku had to put paralyzed seals on the girl in order to drag her back to her father. She was only a civilian, but after their small fight, Toriku had to bandage up his bleeding arm, where the brunette had bitten into his flesh more than once. Minato and Kushina teased him for weeks after that incident. He grinned back to Shin, and after some short interaction their ways parted when they reached a small bakery. A young brown-haired brunette ran to him before he reached the corner. The daughter of the baker pushed a still warm brown bag inside his hands, blushing and nervously swinging on her heels, chatting about silly things. The same woman who after a decade would throw a piece of bread at him, while hatred flamed in her eyes. The same woman, who kissed him on his cheek after he had saved the village from pain. Naruto slowly shook his head after he disappeared behind the corner and moved toward an alley and reached a square. A group of laughing children passed beside him, one pointed a finger toward him, while he could hear the muffled whispers. "There is the yondaime." "Silly. It's not him." A small smile appeared on his face, while he left the crowd and his ANBU guard hiding in the shadows. Two raven-haired men passed beside him, with stern looks on their faces, carefully examining their surroundings, the people on the streets, looking for anything suspicious. Naruto fixed his azure blue orbs on the symbol on their green vest. A shuriken with an Uchiha fan in the middle. Somewhere deep inside his memories he recognized that as the symbol of Konoha's military police force. Naruto let out a weary sigh and shook his head to ease away his thoughts from the upcoming massacre. I still got a lot of time. A young genin burst out from an alley, chasing a big, fat brown cat with a red bow toward Naruto. A nostalgic feeling ran through him while he easily caught the runaway animal, holding her up by the nape of her neck. The panting boy stopped slide-slip in the dirt, breathing heavily. The Chunin eyed the wonky black-haired boy with the white bandages on his chin and cheeks as he caught his breath. "Thank you, Shinobi-san." A foxy grin appeared on Naruto's face. "You know, if I hand her over, you will owe me a ramen." The genin narrowed his eyes, eyeing him without a word for a long minute, before he nodded and held out his small hand. "Deal. But only one bowl." Naruto nodded and after a short handshake he handed over the struggling cat to the young shinobi, who immediately touched the small device on his neck to report to the rest of the team. "I got her, Izumo. I'm heading toward the meeting point. End. Kotetsu." The boy gave a small bow to Naruto and turned around toward the Hokage tower, but before he could take a step, the desperately struggling cat ran her claws on the chubby cheeks of the genin, leaving 4 thin red lines on his face. Kotetsu automatically dropped the cat and tapped his abused chin with a painful yelp, squeezing his eyes shut. Naruto could swear that the mother or most likely grandmother of Tora grinned at him before she disappeared in an alley with the cursing boy behind her. He could hear when Kotetsu informed the rest of his team about the escape on the next rooftop. Some things never change. The Chunin slowly shook his head, still chuckling while he walked away toward his destination. Naruto reached the border district of Konoha. He glanced up on the great walls, eyeing the patrolling squads. A sad smile ran across his eyes as they locked on a young kunoichi in the middle of her teens. Her red eyes locked with him for a second, before Kurenai gratefully ran toward the main gate. Naruto let out a sigh and dug his hands inside his pockets. His foot leading him on his way, hopefully away from his dark thoughts, away from Team 8. From Kiba. From Shino, from Hinata. Naruto shook his head to clear his thoughts just in time to avoid bumping into a tall man's back next to a high wooded wall. The man slowly turned around and gave a light bow to Naruto, who returned the gesture much deeper. While he locked his eyes to the milky orbs in front of him, recognition ran through him as he carefully, but still in low-key, eyed the very familiar man in front of him. His long black hair, the stern look on Hinata's father's face. No. Something was off on the well-known features. Naruto's eyes rested on the Hitayat on the man's forehead when he realized who he was facing. He distantly felt another eye on him and he glanced toward a tall, graceful woman, who stepped out from the entrance of the compound seconds ago and gave him a light nod. Odaraki-san. Hyuga-san. The Chunin blinked. Then again. His eyes locked on a small figure in the arms of the woman. A small, sleeping figure, with short raven black hair, slowly sucking his thumb in his dream. Hisashi, let's go. Niji is tired. A ghost of a smile appeared on Naruto's face, as he eyed the small prodigy in his mother's arms and couldn't suppress a chuckle when a thin line of drool appeared on edge of the small lips, slowly moving toward Niji's chubby chin. The tall man nodded to the woman and they left Naruto alone after a small nod, who roared with laughter inside his head. Oh man. That was just flawless. He still chuckled when the image of the driveling Niji popped up inside his head, suppressing his last memories of the black-haired teen, leaning against his shoulder as he let out his last breath with a smile on his face. His feet moved again, moving him away from the Hyuga compound. A shiver ran through his spine when the image of a big-eyed child with black hair, dressed in a green sleeper, flew across his mind. His thoughts wandered toward a baby Tenten, and he imagined her baby version playing with a rattler made from a kunai. A soft chuckle left his mouth, but his lips curved down into a smaller and more gentle smile when another thought dug into his mind. Naruto closed his eyes and turned around to head back to the center of the village, to check on another baby, still floating in her mother's womb, waiting patiently for the moment of birth. Naruto found himself sitting on a bench, almost directly in front of a house, under an enormous and ancient cherry tree, waiting patiently for hours, for only a moment-long glimpse. His head slipped from his palm for not the first time, and his foggy mind cleared again as the dream slipped away from his brain by the harsh movement. The door finally opened and he had to calm down his pounding heart when he finally saw what he was waiting for. A tall, fair-skinned, blonde-haired woman stepped out from the house with an obviously round tummy. Her green eyes locked with his own for a mere moment, and he waved a hand toward the surprised Kunoichi, who in the end left the house with a wondering face. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. "Just a little bit more, Sakura, just a little bit more and we will meet again." Naruto found himself sitting on his well-known spot on his father's head. He rested his crossed arms on his tucked legs, watching his loved village in the afternoon light. His eyes moved toward a distant spot, where he knew he would find the Uchiha compound behind the large trees. He restrained the urge to check on his other friends. It would be almost impossible for him to sneak inside the walls, especially to those which were crowded with those creepy eyes. They would spot him in a second, and he doubted he could come up with an acceptable excuse why he is lurking and spying inside the compounds. His gaze moved toward where he knew the compound of the Inuzuka could be found. A small smile appeared on his face when he thought back the short-tempered Kiba. Their arguments, their fights, their laughs. Naruto squeezed his eyes shut and turned his head toward another comrade's compound before opening them again. The Aburames. The Naras. The Akimikis. Despair and sorrow started to spread inside his mind, as he rested his sight on the village below his legs. Finally something diverted his darkening thoughts. He heard small footsteps behind the monument, deep inside the woods, as somebody was marching toward his hiding place, not aware of how much noise he was making. Naruto heard the ruffle of the unsecured clothes, the cracking of the twigs under the footsteps, the rustle of the dried leaves on the ground, and felt the spike of that someone's chakra. The spikes of a troubled, angry person. He heard a muffled thump and a painful yelp. The scent of a small amount of fresh blood reached his sensitive nose. Finally, the silhouette of a child evolved from the woods, cursing under his breath, clutching his hand on his abused fist as he tried to channel his frustration to one of the trees. However, the tree was much stronger. Nothing could prove better than the bruise and small amount of blood on his fist. The young boy hopped down to the monument, only meters from Naruto, and sat next to one of Minato's stone spikes. The blonde shinobi froze in his seat, but he forced his muscles to slowly turn his head and lock his eyes on the child next to him. The giant stone spike shrouded most of his small form, only his grimacing face and flashing anger in his eyes was visible. The Chunin sight frozen on the dark hair of the child, the spiking ponytail, the dark, but still glowing eyes, and the long scar which ran across the bridge of his nose from cheek to cheek. His heart forgot to pound for a second, and his mouth suddenly felt drier than the deserts of Suna. Irika. He went back immediately to Konoha to look after the children who stayed in the village, after he fled from that turtle island to join his comrades on the battlefield. The child found a small stone and threw it from the monument, toward the village. Stupid sensei, stupid academy, stupid Hokage, stupid village. The small child angrily cursed under his breath and threw another small stone toward the village after his each and every curse, weighing his words. The boy suddenly froze when he finally realized that he wasn't alone. He slowly turned his head to the side, to meet the wide and shocked cerulean eyes and the parted mouth of Naruto. They stayed in complete silence, each other frozen for their own reasons. The moment was broken by the loud laughing of the blonde and the gaping of the 10-year-old Umino Irika. "What's so funny?" The child hopped into his feet, pointing a finger toward the still chuckling blonde, who just waved a hand. His once sensei as a cute child, cursing and hissing the academy, his own sensei, his village and the Hokage. His late teacher, who lectured him that he should show respect to the leaders and toward the village, because the young Uzumaki had called the Sandame Gigi. Suddenly realization flushed through Irika's face and a small hint of panic could be seen in his dark eyes. "Why, you are the Yandames, I didn't mean to." A foxy grin appeared on Naruto's face, seeing the starting panic and the slight tremble of the small hands. "Relax, kid. I'm not going to tattle." Irika relaxed his tense muscles but his eyes still mirror suspicion. "What's your name, Gaki?" The child narrowed his eyes and the suspicious glance only grew. "Why do you want to know?" Naruto shrugged and leaned back on his back, folding his arms behind his neck, crossing his legs in a casual way, while his eyes fixed on a crystal-white puffy cloud. "I'm just trying to start a conversation." Irika slowly stepped out to see his new blonde companion behind the stone spike, but in the end he decided that he really wouldn't tattle. He moved next to the laying Chunin and sat down crossed legs, still watching Naruto from the corner of his eyes. "I'm Umino Irika." Naruto sat up and held out his hand toward the child. "Todoroki Toriku at your service." Irika made a confused face. "Todoroki? I thought they said that you are a relative of Yondaima-sama. Shouldn't you be a Namikaze?" The sudden "sama" tag wasn't missed by Naruto, but he just sent a gentle smile back. "It's a long story." A frown appeared on the child's face, but in the end he suppressed his curiosity and stayed in silence. "Su Irukaken. What makes you to curse everything?" The boy folded his arms in front of his chest, and snorted. "I'm not a girl. Don't call me Chan." Naruto only rolled his eyes, but his blue orbs sparkled cheekily. "Care to tell me, Irukaken, what upset you that much, that you have to punch a tree?" Irika tried to hide his bruised fist in his embarrassment and he felt as his cheeks become redder, but in the end he reversed the movement. "It doesn't matter anymore, he already knows." "How did you know that?" Naruto only shrugged, and Irika stayed in silence for a long minute, watching the village under his feet, when a group with green vests jumped toward the Hokage tower from rooftop to rooftop in the afternoon sunlight. "I failed on the academy pretest." Naruto stayed in silence, waiting for Irika to continue, but he was shocked in the inside. "Sensei told me, if I was unable to make it on the next pretest, he won't let me apply to graduate with the early team, because of a new regulation." Naruto narrowed his eyes, eyeing the young boy next to him carefully. "Why do you want to graduate early?" Irika stayed in silence for a long minute before he finally opened his mouth to answer. Because. I want to become stronger. To learn strong jutsus and to show them." "Why?" Irika finally looked up to Naruto with a confused face. "Why what? Why do you want to become stronger?" "Because with strong jutsus, I can prove myself. Sensei told me that I won't be a battle-type shinobi. He said that I haven't got the affinity for that, nor the mindset. I want to show them." Naruto let out a sigh when he saw the sour face on Irika. Maybe a small push wouldn't hurt. He heard the displeased snort of Kurama in the background. "I'm sure you will do fine next year. Plus power isn't always about flashy jutsu. You can find great powers in much different ways and places." Irika raised a curious eyebrow. "Power could be found in a piece of paper. A seal, for example. Power could be found in your heart. And do you know what holds the biggest power? Irika slowly shook his head. The younger generation. The child made a confused look. I don't get it. You will one day. Naruto made a wondering face toward the blue sky. Geez. Telling this to you, I feel like an old man. I'm starting to lose my power of youth. Naruto suddenly froze. I didn't say that, did I, Dadabayo? Naruto turned toward Irika with wide eyes, and faced a confused child, while he ruffled his own blonde locks in his shock. He slowly shook his head and leaned back. Never mind. You are crazy. Normal people are boring. A soft smile appeared on Naruto's face. Hey Irika. Aren't you hungry for a ramen? It's my treat. The child made a wondering look, tapping his chin, and nodded with a wide smile. Naruto straightened and ruffled the dark lock of his once-sensei, smoothing out tufts in his tidy ponytail. Naruto was followed by a cursing child, desperately trying to fix his ruined hair on the way back to the city center where Naruto could finally start to pay back his debts toward his sensei. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.